There is no team that failed to meet expectations as poorly as the New York Jets did in 2024. Offensively, they were one of the worst units in the NFL. They were organizationally ran by just poor leadership. They caved in to player demands when they didn't need to, and overall, this team was a dumpster fire. 2024 for the offense, they statistically just didn't do anything well. They were poor at scoring, poor at moving the ball down the field, poor at running the ball. Aaron Rodgers statistically had an okay year, but nobody else really performed up to what they were expected to do. Part of it, I do believe, was the addition of Davante Adams halfway through the season. That definitely stunted the growth of Garrett Wilson throughout the year. It stunted the growth of Breece Hall. And even though the offensive line had some veteran pieces on there, they underperformed as well with the offensive line. You're happy to see guys like Joe Tippmann, Elijah Vera Tucker, and Olu Fashanu get some snaps last year. But these guys, they just, all in all, the unit was just bad. Defensively wasn't as terrible. They allowed a decent amount of points, but they didn't really let up that many yards. I think this was a team that just was constantly playing behind the eight ball in terms of, the offense just wasn't setting them up for much success. They weren't putting them in positions to be, playing defense with the lead, which is a way better position to be in, obviously, than playing at a deficit. You're happy to see guys like Will McDonald and Jamie Sherwood have really solid years. But other than that, you're not really happy with much else that this team did last year. Now, the free agency list for 2025 for the New York Jets, it's obviously highlighted by the eventual release of Aaron Rodgers sometime in this offseason. But there's some other players where I think it's just a year to kind of reset the books for this team. You obviously probably don't want to lose guys like Jamie Sherwood, who led this team in tackles last year, actually led the NFL in solo tackles. Him next to Williams at that linebacker position, that's a pretty solid duo to have, especially, two linebackers is really all you play nowadays. And with Aaron Glenn coming over, he plays two linebackers a lot with what he did in Detroit between Alex Anzalone and Jack Campbell. So I think this is a team that's going to want to keep Jamie Sherwood around, pair him with Quincy Williams, and let them be the two leaders on that defensive unit. But other than that, Hassan Reddick, Tyron Smith, Tony Adams, Ashton Davis, even DJ Reed, who, I don't think you want to lose DJ Reed, but I think you're fine with it. You want to just reset what this team is about and get as many of the players who were affected by poor leadership or poor habits last year and in previous years with the New York Jets. Just get them out. Just let them go other places and start to rebuild what this organization is going to be about. The roster for 2025, as constructed right now, technically has Davante Adams and Allen Lazard on them. But as I'm going to get into with the offensive free agency goals, your hope is that neither of those guys are on the team next year. When you look at what this team currently constructed looks like, you have the obvious glaring hole at safety. You have some depth that you want to get at your outside linebacker spots as well as the interior of your offensive line. But overall, this is a solid team as it's constructed, and you hope with a new leadership structure and with a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, you just hope that this team can take the step forward with what they already have. Now, the free agency goals for the 2025 New York Jets offense, I've already mentioned it, but you have to figure out how to reset the books with Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams, and Allen Lazard. Between Adams and Lazard, it's a lot easier than it is with Rodgers. With Adams and Lazard, you can release both of those guys, and the amount of money you save compared to the dead cap penalty, it's pennies compared to what you're actually going to pay them if they're on the team. With Aaron Rodgers, this is why he's going to be on the roster up until, I believe, June 1st, because the way it's going to get designated is going to depend on how much his cap hit is going to be. So he's going to be technically on the roster, but you have to figure out how to get him off of it. And so that leads into the next part of the goals is who do we want to be quarterback? Do we want it to be Tyrod Taylor? Do we want it to be Jordan Travis? Do we want it to be from an outside source? Do we want to draft somebody? That's the major goal, is who do we want to be quarterback for the next year, possibly 2 years. The next thing is you need to get a bigger receiver on the outside, somebody who can win those one-on-one jump ball situations. You got to get somebody to pair with Garrett Wilson and Malachi Corley. Somebody like a Demarcus Robinson, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, or even a Tim Patrick would make a lot of sense, as he would come over from Detroit like offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand, who actually was hired from the Detroit Lions as their passing game coordinator. So I could see Tim Patrick being the easy fill-in spot at that outside receiver. The offensive line also needs some help. I think on the interior, you get somebody at guard who can start alongside Elijah Vera Tucker, somebody like a Patrick McCarry from the Baltimore Ravens. And I think at center, you need to get somebody who can be a depth piece behind Joe Tippmann, like a Dan Feeney. You also need some help at tackle. You need somebody to start opposite of Olu Fashanu. So somebody like Jedrick Wills, who I think this is a guy in Jedrick Wills who has really not benefited from the system in Cleveland, having no Nick Chubb for the last 2 years, having no quarterback really for the last 3 or 4 seasons since Baker Mayfield left, and just being in a poor offense. I think you put Jedrick Wills in a position where he can actually, be in a successful team. The outlook on who he is as a player drastically improves. And then you do need a swing tackle that can come in as a depth piece, like a David Quessenberry. Now, for the defense, at safety, like I already mentioned, it's a pretty glaring hole. You have only one player on the roster at that point, and Simpson, I just don't think they want Simpson to be the starter. Since it's Aaron Glenn coming over from Detroit, and it's going to be Steve Wilks calling the defense, who, in his career, his last stop as a defensive coordinator was with the San Francisco 49ers. He had guys like Talanoa Hufanga. He had some pretty successful players at that defensive back spot. Charvarius Ward. He had some pretty successful times coaching the defensive backs in his career too, even going back to when he was with the Arizona Cardinals. You have guys like Budda Baker on that team. So secondary help is massively needed. At safety, you get guys that can be productive. You get somebody like a Trayvon Merrick, who in my opinion slots in as like the Kirby Joseph type of player that Aaron Glenn coached in Detroit. And you get Xavier Woods, who fits into that Brian Branch role. And you get guys for depth. You re-sign Ashton Davis, and you get somebody like an Adrian Colbert in the secondary. I think as well, if you're Aaron Glenn, you try super, super hard to get Carlton Davis to follow you to New York. He's probably the best corner that's available in free agency this year, and he had his best years of his career in Detroit the last 2 or 3 seasons. Even in Tampa Bay, he was a pretty good player, winning a Super Bowl than when Tom Brady was there. So you get Carlton Davis to follow you there, and you get some more guys in the pass rush department. Will McDonald had a solid year last year, but you're hoping that you add more around McDonald, Jermaine Johnson, and Quinnen Williams. You get some depth pieces. You get a Charles Omenihu. You get a Dante Fowler, or even a Patrick Jones II from Minnesota, who had his best year of his career last year. Now on to the draft. So I think we guarantee that at the number 7 selection, the Jets are already going to have seen at least Abdul Carter, Will Campbell, Travis Hunter, and at least one of the quarterbacks is gone before number 7, possibly even both Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. So the choice will be more than likely between Mason Graham, Will Johnson, Tyler Warren, and possibly one of the quarterbacks. Kelvin Banks Jr. is probably one of the top choices available too. I think since tight end is the hardest position to try to fill through free agency this year, the value that somebody like Tyler Warren could bring to this offense, and especially just put him there and let him develop until we figure out the quarterback of the future, that's probably the perfect choice for the New York Jets at that number 7 spot. At number 42, I think you need to get a young offensive tackle for the future. Even though I already said sign somebody like Jedrick Wills, who is 25 years old, I could just be wrong that Jedrick Wills is actually a bad offensive tackle in the NFL, and he's not somebody that you can rely on at that left tackle position for years to come. If that is not the case and Jedrick Wills is still good, then you still get a young offensive tackle that can develop. And, Jedrick Wills, you sign him to a 1-year deal and see what he can do. And even if he's so good and you still draft an offensive tackle, at this spot, you're drafting somebody that possibly could even kick into inside. I don't know if Ersery could do it, but, Josh Connerly, Jonas Savanaia, you have guys that could kick into guard. If neither of those guys are available, then build up the secondary. Trey Amos, Xavier Watts, etc. You build up and hopefully build a main strength of your roster. At number 92, I think you throw a dart at the quarterback board and try to hit a bullseye. You have guys like Quinn Ewers, you have guys like Will Howard, even a Dylan Gabriel or a Riley Leonard, who I think at 92 in the 3rd round, it might be a reach to go get either of those guys. But you just need somebody that's young at that quarterback position that hopefully you can develop into just a solid bridge starter for a few years. That's really what you're hoping for. You're at ground zero when it comes to the quarterback position. So just getting anything positive at that position is a major goal going forward. Overall, the New York Jets probably are not very good in 2025 in terms of putting up wins, but that's not very different than what they've been the last few years. And you just don't want to try to force it. As much as I think we love Tyrod Taylor as a quarterback and as a player in the NFL and the story that he's had, we know that he's not going to lead this team to the playoffs. We know that that's not what this team is capable of as currently constructed. You want the defense to actually take that step forward. We always say that Quinnen Williams is one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL. He needs to start proving that. We said when Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald got drafted highly in the 1st round to this team that they were the edge rushers of the future. They need to prove that. Sauce Gardner is constantly regarded as one of the best corners in the NFL since he came into the league 3 years ago. He needs to continue to prove that. And I think they have the perfect guy at head coach and at defensive coordinator with Steve Wilks to actually be put to that task. I don't think these guys have been put to that task the last 2 or 3 seasons because it's kind of been a shit show with who's been at quarterback, with who's been on the coaching staff outside of Saleh, because I don't think Saleh contributed to the dumpster fire. I think he was one of the few guys trying to extinguish it. But from the ownership standpoint, from the management standpoint, from the coaching standpoint, from the quarterback standpoint, there's been nobody at a real leader role. And now they have that with Aaron Glenn at head coach. They have that with defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. And offensively, you just hope to kind of tread water and see improvement from Garrett Wilson, from Breece Hall, from whoever you draft in the 1st round. But overall, this is not going to be a very good team in 2025. It just needs to be an improvement from 2024.